We are in the book of Ephesians chapter 6. One of the challenges when we look in the Bible and we start to look through maybe some words or phrases or ideas, what happens is in culture, things populate in our mind. So when we talk about, and especially in this text this morning, I think there's some challenges. And I know when I read it, that I had to kind of ask the question, what's really going on here? How it would work, the book of Ephesians was a book that would be read out loud in front of a group of people at the church. So Paul, as he would write these letters of Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, he's writing them to groups of people that met in people's houses. The reason simply they did that was there was somebody that was wealthy that had a large place to meet. Renting a place was kind of expensive, and Christianity was somewhat illegal at the time. And so there's a lot of dynamics going here. And so Paul, who himself is in prison, decides to write a letter to this church in Ephesus. He starts off the letter and he starts to talk about God's greatness, what God has done, how he's redeemed us as a people. When he gets to the back half of the letter, chapter 5, verse 21 and following, it's a very personal letter. He talks about these institutions that while in Rome existed, but were also, he talks about their function, design, what they're for, where they came from. When one of the institutions we looked at a couple of weeks ago was on marriage. And in Paul, in setting up this whole conversation, he starts off chapter 5, verse 21. And when he talks about these three institutions that follows, he goes, let me tell you the key on how to live as a Christian in this. He goes, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Paul, when he looks at these institutions, he looks at the reality of these things, whether marriage or family or work. He looks at them while there's a culture around them that have their own definition. What he does is he grounds them in what God has designed and his purpose is for these institutions. And what he does is he challenges it. For example, he talks about women and men being equal before the Lord. He talks about a wife's role and a husband's role. But both of those roles both have to submit under Christ, who is the head over all things. And while he also does, he talks about that in chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, he talks about family. In the Roman world at the time, the family was under complete control of the father. The father could not only discipline the kids, but he could actually kill the child if he wanted to, because Rome had viewed the law being in the father's hands. At some point, the father could reject the child altogether when they were born. They would present the child to the father. If he took in the child, they would be in the family. But if he turned his back on the child, they would take him and they would put them in the forum for anybody or anyone to come and take. So while Paul doesn't talk about some of these things happening, he talks about the responsibilities of fathers and of parents. He talks about the responsibilities of children. And what he does is, as Christians, these are people that are from different areas, from different backgrounds. They're from all over, probably the Roman world. But they heard about the gospel, and they heard about Christ. They love him. They're gathered together as a church. And he starts to speak to the foundation and the reason, how do you fulfill your role that God has intended for you to do? And so when we come to this text, this third institution, he's going to be using these words of slaves and of masters. I know when you first hear that word, the first thing we think as Americans in the 21st century is the African slave trade. We think of the horrible things about taking groups of people, not by their own choice or will, but by force, the cruelty that ensued in all of that. And so this verse and these verses have been misused by churches for centuries. Because what happens is you think about the institution that comes to your mind. You think about that institution. But what I want to do is share a little bit about what Paul was speaking to in the group of people he was referencing at the time of Rome. This word here about slaves, this could be said by William Barclay. He's a commentator, and this is what he says. When Paul wrote to slaves, he must have been writing to a very large number in the Christian church. It has been computed that the Roman Empire, there were millions of slaves. In Paul's day, a kind and terrible fatal idleness had fallen on the citizens of Rome. Rome was the mistress of the world, and therefore it was beneath the dignity of a Roman citizen to work. Practically all work was done by slaves. Even doctors and teachers were slaves. Even the closest friends of the emperors, their secretaries who dealt with letters and appeals and finance, were slaves. And here's what's happening culturally at this time. Rome had expanded and taken over the then-known world. What they had also done is provided these massive avenues for trade and commerce to come out. That's why when you hear the phrase, all roads lead to, not Paris, right? They all lead to Rome. Why is that? Rome as an economic force had this monster of a machine it created. At the same time, the citizens of Rome did not feel it was their duty to do this manual labor. So when the Roman troops would go out and they would conquer a piece of land, what they received in their victory was not only the wealth of the city, but the people of the city. So imagine people from all walks of life, different upbringings, backgrounds, ethnicities, all across the world, all being brought together in these cities because they're property of the Roman government. And because of the engine of commerce, the engine of trade that Rome had produced, it had to keep those avenues running. And so what would happen at this moment in all these people that they had acquired through all their conquest of the world, they had all these people that were slaves. And so these people worked for their masters. Now, the slave, as it talks about here, it started, and there was many cruel, horrible practices that happened with these people. You know, prostitution, all these type of things these were the slaves of the people that were used to do those things. From not only that, but also there was great places of knowledge for doctors and teachers and secretaries and people that would counsel other people. So slaves had a wide range of jobs and responsibilities in the Roman world. These people, the Romans though, as Barclay points out, is that the Romans became idle in their work. They viewed certain type of work beneath them. This work that was beneath them, they didn't want to get their hands dirty. So they would have people in their estate, they would call them slaves, who would do the work for them. This is very typical because in Roman thinking, the gods did no manual labor. And them feeling a little more superior than most humans, we are like the gods. They don't do labor, we don't do labor. The gods created man to do the labor because they had no dignity. They would not bring themselves down to do it. So man took on other men to do their labor for them. And this idleness had set into the people of Rome. What we do know is about slavery and this type of thing that was created in these centuries, that at the end of the Roman Empire, when Rome had fallen, Rodney Stark, who's a historian, sociologist, writes about what had happened in this time frame. Rome at one point went from a pagan religion, and you might not know this, every basically ancient empire had a principal religion that was attached to it. And for Rome, it was paganism until after Constantine's death, Constantine's son changed it from paganism to Christianity. It wasn't Constantine, but it was a son. So in that movement of changing the religion, it wasn't that they became a religious nation all of a sudden. They just swapped out religions. So Christianity now is permeating throughout the world as the official religion of Rome. Rodney Stark writes this in one of his books. He says this: although it may be fashionable to deny it, anti-slavery doctrines began to appear in Christian theology soon after the decline of Rome and were accompanied by eventual disappearance of slavery in all but the fringes of Christian Europe. So the fall of Rome is taken over, Rome falls apart, they move the city over to Constantinople, there's a whole big kind of schism things that happen. But what we find out is, as Christianity spread, so did the demise of slavery. When Europeans subsequently instituted slavery in the New World, so think of that as the African slave trade and those things, they did so over strenuous papal opposition, meaning the Pope said, you're not going to do this, and as Christians, we are against you moving forward in the slave trade. A fact that was conveniently lost from history until recently. Finally, the abolition of the New World slavery was initiated and achieved by Christian activists. William Wilberforce and a series of other men for abolishing the slave trade that they viewed that not only was against God, but it was against what God had commanded us to do and how to treat each other. And so their force, and historians, Rodney Stark talks about this, the reason is, why did they do it? Why did they push slavery out? They say, hey, this doesn't belong here. There was no profit for them to gain, but it was what Paul is doing. He's grounding us in, not only as Christians, what our faith comes from, what we believe that God has designed and created and made, and what he speaks about you and about me and of all people had taken such a weight and such a gravity on them, there was no other decision but we got to get rid of this. And so what we see here, while Paul doesn't maybe specifically deal with some of our questions about institutions, he teaches something that's revolutionary, okay? And what he does is in every facet of the household, whether with husbands and wives, you're equal. The husband does not own you. Whether in family, these children, fathers, this is your job. Children, this is your job, and this is based out of what God has designed you to do. Or lastly, in this economic engine of work. How are you supposed to live as a Christian, Paul says? What's your responsibility to each other? What we see here from the text, if we look at it, verse 7, serve wholeheartedly as it were serving the Lord, not people. One of the things that Paul will do is he will get at the nature of what is work all about. Work, in here, is serving the Lord. So when he talks about slaves who were used to help in the master's household, who did so many different tasks throughout Rome, who helped the engine of the economy work, he says that work essentially is a calling. And when you do it, you're serving the Lord. Now, where would Paul get an idea like that from? In the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 2, it says this: by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The Bible starts off with a narrative and a story that work was created by God for us, that when God created work, he created it good. And he used work to help us flourish as people. And on top of all that, God himself does work. This is a totally different mindset than the people that Paul is talking to. The gods don't do manual labor. What is God doing? Forming, creating. He's making man. He puts his hands in the dirt. That is not what the gods do. And Paul says, let me tell you about what God has created in this thing called work and where it came from. The second thing that he talks about is that people are created equal. Look at what it says in verse 9. Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven. When they read this, you got to imagine this is a revolutionary idea. Slaves, Seneca wrote, other people, contemporary people in Paul's day, slaves are property. What is he saying? Actually, they're not property. And God sees what you're doing to them. Not only does he see what you're doing to them, you both have the same master. You can imagine the kind of the ripple effect of that type of a statement going in there. What is he saying? That every human being has dignity and worth and value. It is not your position or your fortune to be born a Roman citizen that you have any more value than the people that have been conquered. You are all created equal. And on top of it, God's watching how you're mistreating people, and he takes note of it. So Paul levels out the field. You both have the same master, and what does he say at the end? And there's no favoritism with him. You think that you have a leg to stand on because of who you were born to, how you were born, where you were born. And he goes, I don't care. Because the fundamental idea is this, that male, female, humanity, to be human, God looks at all of us the same. He doesn't look at what race, what background, what country you were born into. There's no favoritism to him. He's created us all equal. Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. People are our brothers, not our property. One of the things that Paul writes, it's this book of Philemon. It's a very, very short book of the New Testament. Philemon, as he writes this book, it's a story. There was a slave that belonged to this master in this Christian household, and he stole something from his master, and he ran off to go get his freedom and avoid any type of punishment. As he runs off, he coincidentally runs into the Apostle Paul, who's also in jail. As he's there, he's talking to this slave. The slave becomes a Christian. And Paul sends him back to his master to seek forgiveness and reconciliation for them to be together. Listen to how Paul talks about this relationship. Paul says to this household, he goes, listen, you are to treat this person, verse 16, no longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you. Now listen to why he explains he's dear to him, okay? Both as a fellow man, he's a human, and as a brother in the Lord because of his faith. He goes, listen, man, you should take back this guy in, and you don't treat him as a slave. He's a human. And as a human, he's also your brother in Christ. And what Paul is doing is changing the mindset of how we view people. And you know what that will do? That will disrupt any institution. When you know why I treat a person with dignity, when you know why you work, you will disrupt every institution. Because what you will be is not challenging the cultural norm of the day. You are showing how your faith informs your view of people. Whether you're a master or you're a slave, whether you're a husband or a wife or a child or a parent. And what Paul is doing here is grounding us in the foundation of why do you do what you do? Do you not know what you were designed to do? Do you not know how your relationships at work are supposed to be? So we know what the design of work is, but we see the failure of work. The book of Genesis has this story in it. The book of Genesis chapter 2 is a picture of this. In the beginning, Genesis 1:1, the earth was, God created the heavens and the earth, and it was void and it was empty. Those words, void and empty, are this idea that it was wasteful, like a desert. So when I was in Israel the last time I was there, and we go out of Jerusalem into the desert, it looks rough. I mean, you're like, I don't know how anything can live here. It just looks rough. And you'd see these little Bedouin camps and stuff, and you're like, I don't even know how that's possible. It's so everything about the environment just sucks life out of you. So that's what it was. But here's what God does. Genesis 2, he creates a garden. He takes the raw nature of the world, he forms it, makes trees that bear fruit. He takes beauty, he makes a garden, he makes a space. He takes the man, places him in the garden, and says, now you do the same to the garden and what of the things that I've taught you. Go and cultivate the garden. So what does Adam do? He's in a garden, he's with his wife, he names the animals. He puts structure there. He cuts the trees. He takes care of the garden. And so to cultivate, to produce culture comes from this idea. You're taking the raw nature of things and you're forming them into products. You're taking thoughts and expressions and forming them into statements. You're taking devices and you're putting things together. You are taking the raw nature of the world and you're producing a product called culture. And culture is how we view the world. It's how we use things that we have made to live life. We're producing a level of culture. And so what does God do? He cultivates and says to man, you do the same. So if you don't know this, that part of your design to think, to innovate, to create, did not magically come from some neurons randomly fired in your brain. This is part of your design as a person. You were designed to do things, to work. It's part of what it means to be human. We have been given a task to go out, to cultivate. And so what you see here, though, is that the failure of work breaks down when men decide that they know how to not only do a better job, but to break the rules. And what happens is work then becomes cursed. Genesis 3 tells us that our work has been cursed. This is what God says to Adam after they disobeyed God and went their own way. To Adam, he said, Genesis 3:17, because you listened to your wife and ate the fruit from the tree about which I commanded, you must not eat from. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. At that moment, the God-given mandate to go into the world and to flourish, to go to produce culture, to all these things, is now overshadowed with thorns and thistles, with sweat, with pain. So when you do your work, there's frustration. It's not yielding the results that it should yield. That inside of your work, it just becomes agony and painful, and things don't make sense. Situations don't make sense. People are cutting corners, they're doing wrong things, and what you see is an institution that was created for us to help each other flourish, for us to produce the way of life we should, we don't do it. And because the earth itself, the ground itself has been cursed, and our work has been cursed, and our labor has been cursed. What happens is, when he talks about here, he goes, also, our approach to work has been cursed. Look at what he says here in verse 6. He goes, obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. He says, the problem even in our work now is that we are looking to get acceptance not only from our employer, but from the products of our labor. You want to have value from what you can accomplish. And what he's saying is the reason that you work is because you're already accepted. Not to get something from the value of that, but he goes, what happens is we even ourselves are working for the wrong motives. There's a story in the book of Genesis, chapter 11. It's a beautiful story in some senses. It's showing the ability and the flourishing of mankind. But it also shows how their motives of their heart are self-seeking. They don't use work in its proper status. They don't use work to do what it's meant to do. They use work to build into themselves. Here's the story, Genesis 11, verse 1. Now the whole world had one language and common speech. Now that's a part of culture, language. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Now, that might not sound like a big deal to you, but this is a revolutionary technological breakthrough. They figured out how to take, bricks, make them, use tar, and what it's done is it's opened up all these economic avenues in building. Instead of using stones in a primitive way, it was like kind of a major leap forward in technology. So what are they going to do with this technology? How are they going to help flourish? Are they going to fulfill God's command to go and to flourish, to benefit other people, to go into the world? And the story tells us, verse 4, then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. They used technology, they used work to make themselves famous, to build into them. Let us make a name for ourselves so that unless we are scattered. They used the culture of language, they used the culture of brick and tar, and what they did is their work became to them an idol. It became something that they worshiped because it gave them significance. Look at what we have done. So God comes down and he goes, all right, that whole scattering thing, it's happening now. So what does he do? He disrupts culture. You know how he does it? You guys all speak different languages now. Good luck with that. And there's no Rosetta Stone you can go get on the internet. And then they go. And then you know what he does? I'm going to scatter yourselves out. And he does it. But how does he do it? He does it through culture, which is fascinating. The next thing we see here, we as people are always looking to build favor, to have acceptance from our work. Verse 9, it shows at the same time is that we work for the approval of others. Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism in him. It shows that this idea of not only as us to work to get approval, but we work, he says you have to work in a way where that you don't show favoritism one to another. Now, that might not make a lot of sense for us, because I don't think we really do that as a culture, but I think we do. Now, I have a friend of mine who's a doctor, so we talked about it last night, so I'm not picking on the medical field, but just don't, so there's not a hate on anybody. So let's bring it up though. What we've created, a doctor, once he graduates high school, they just don't give him a needle and a thread and they say, you're a surgeon, good luck, I hope the best. You took a high school anatomy class and I think you can memorize all the bones. They go through a tremendous amount of work. They go through that, they got to take these tests, they get scored on them, then they got to go to medical school, and it's a very complicated process, and for good reason, because you don't want them saying, I think it's your kidney, but I don't really know what's in there. It's kind of fuzzy in my head. You want them to be definitive. Now, what's the purpose of all that education? What's the purpose of all that training? Why do they make them shadow other doctors and watch surgery after surgery, or whatever the profession is? Why do they make them do that? Because what's the end purpose? To make money? To make themselves a name, a title on the building? No, what's the purpose of that profession? So that when you are sick with disease and are dying, that they can come in with technology and wisdom, knowing your symptom, treat the symptoms so that what happens for you? You can go out and flourish. That you're not sick anymore. That you understand what's happening with this natural body that's breaking down. I mean, no, I don't know if this is a surprise to you or not, but you know what you're going to die of one day? Disease. I mean, so in some senses, then the question is, what's the purpose of trying to help people? Because at the nature of humans, the nature of how we're wired, we want to flourish. We want health. So we've created professions where they give their life to understand how to help you flourish. So we look at a profession like a doctor and we elevate it as a culture. But let's break it down a little more. So we were having one of our kids, I can't remember which one it was, it's all kind of blurry. And I remember, I didn't share this in the other services, I remember I was there, the beds they give you, I mean, the baby place is really, really nice. It's better than Old Bayfront Hospital. It's way better. It's really nice and really nice. But I remember one of the kids, I was just like, something was wrong with me. I was just laying on the ground. Nurse comes in and says, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I'm like, I know there's a lot of fluids that probably spilled on this ground, and that's probably not a safe idea for me to be down here. But I started thinking about it. That for a doctor to come in to diagnose your disease with the wisdom and education he has, the place has to be sanitary. Because there's no worse thing going into a place getting diseases that you didn't come in with, okay? But for a doctor to do his job, other people have to do their job. And here's the point. The point is that every time you're supposed to leave the room, I'm guessing, I'm not a medical profession, but somebody's supposed to go clean it. They're to disinfect things. They're supposed to wipe it down. You don't sleep on the same sheets that somebody just rolled in that died. They're like, oh, here's a bed. They're supposed to change it. Why is that? Because they don't want you to get sick. But here's the deal. If you don't got the guy changing the sheets, the doctor can't do his job. So here's the thing. All work is necessary. If the person's not cleaning the sheets, disinfecting the bed, disinfecting the area, the nurse is not informing the doctor, taking the care, and the doctor's not doing his job, then the patient doesn't recover. What I'm saying is this. If you're the person picking up the sheets, you have just as important job as the doctor coming and diagnosing the disease. Because that person could get sick and die because you didn't do your job well. And the thing is this, all work, God says, is sacred. All work is sacred. So when you do your job, whether you're answering the phone for somebody to help them fix a bill, or whether you're a doctor, or you're a surgeon, or you're the person scrubbing the sheets, all work is necessary for human flourishing. The other day, my dad calls me about helping him with something. And I'm like, Dad, and so he normally doesn't really do this. And so he's like, I need help in cleaning this house out. So I went in the house, and I didn't know what he wanted. And so I went there, and he's like, you need to have some gloves and stuff like that. And I was like, what are we doing? He's like, it was a family member had died in the house, and could you please help me clean it? Not the body out, but clean out the rest of his stuff out. I was like, that'd be weird. But as soon as I walked in the house, I looked around, and mold was covering everything. I mean, there was so much mold in this house. I'm like, Dad, this is kind of like a death trap. But here's the deal. We had to pay somebody, or they were looking to pay somebody to clean the mold out of the house. And that's a really rough job. But without cleaning mold out of the house, the person that would future buy that house would get sick and possibly die. And what I'm saying is that any field, any work that God's designed you to do, he designs it, and our responsibility in it is to help people flourish. So we have the design of work, the problems with our work, and the beauty of work. The beauty of work is this. All work has been created by God. In our work, our design of what we're to do is to build for the kingdom. Our job in our work is building for his kingdom. How do we do that? We come as servants, whether as employers or as employees. The key to the whole thing is, like I said, chapter 5, verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. You see, the way that I become an effective employer or employee is realizing that not only is my work sacred, but my master, Christ, is in me. And when he's in me, I am working for him. I'm working for him. There's this great book I've read called Every Good Endeavor. I want to read a section of this work. You might be familiar with this person. His name's Martin Luther. Luther was around in the 1600s. And Luther, as he was a priest, he worked as a priest, he served as a priest. God started getting a hold of his heart, became a Christian by reading the book of Romans. He's reading it, became a Christian. So here he is teaching Romans, basically with a PhD in the Catholic Church. And then he started looking at the church. He says, there's some things really wrong with the church right now. And what he wanted to do was not start a new church, not like the Lutheran church down the road. What he wanted to do is he wanted to reform the church. And there became a group of men and women that said, how do we reform the church? So they started looking at some of these institutions. Luther really famously talked about this idea and this concept. And this is what I want to impress on us. It is pure invention, fiction, that pope, bishops, priests, and monks are called the spiritual estate, while princes, lords, artisans, and farmers are called the temporal estate. This is indeed a piece of deceit and hypocrisy, yet no one need be intimidated by it, and that for this reason, all Christians are truly of the spiritual estate, and there is no difference among them except that of office. We are all consecrated priests by baptism. As St. Peter says, you are a royal priesthood in a priestly realm. The Apocalypse says, thou hast made us to be kings and priests by thy blood. And here's what Luther did. Luther changed in the heart and the minds of people is this. My job that I do as a pastor is no more sacred than your job that you do at your job. If you're selling a product, you're producing culture, you're helping people flourish, your job and my job are the same. You know why? We're both and all created to work. And so here's the deal. How is it that the most of your energy, time, effort goes into something, right? 40 to 60 hours a week, if not more. And the other part of your time is sleeping, right? The majority of your time, some people say, well, that's just not sacred. If I could be in the church or if I could lead a Bible study, I could do that. Let me tell you this. If you go do your job well and you help people flourish, if you go out into society and you do good because you have a master that's watching you, you are living out the gospel. You are taking steps of faith to do good to all people. How are you doing good? By doing what he's saying here. You're not threatening. You're taking the institutions of work. You're looking to say, how can I come and serve you? How can I help you flourish as an employee? How can I come alongside you? And when you do that and you go to work Monday morning, you are actually fulfilling what God has designed you as a human to do, is to work. And Luther says, when we go as Christians, not only go to do what God's called us to do in the work field, we go as priests. We go as priests. So when people say, oh, work, business is business, so I can mistreat people and beat them up, that's not a scriptural concept. What he says is your business is sacred, and you have a responsibility in your business how you treat other people. And what he says here, Luther says, by you going out into the institution of work, what you're essentially doing is this. You are acting as a priest from God being sent into the world. And he's using the institution of work to make that known. He's using the institution of family. He's using the institution of marriage. And what I'm saying is this. Your work week, the most of the time that you spend in your life as an adult is sacred work. Don't forget it. And Paul is teaching us how and why it's sacred. He's also saying this, and last thing is this. How do we do this well as Christians? Two things, and I want to share some thoughts with you. Let's look at Christ's example. In the book of Philippians, chapter 2, there was this, whether poem or song, it was some type of liturgical type of thing that the church would do. How do I know? It's all indented in your Bible in Philippians chapter 2. And what it was is, it was something that the church would say constantly. That's the idea. And in this that they would say, whether Paul wrote it or the church had come up with it in Philippi, it was talking about the nature of Christ and what he was like. And this is what it said, Philippians 2, verse 7. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And it was a song or a poem, something that they sang. But you know what that word servant is translated as? Slave. It's the same word, doulos. He became a servant. You know how Christ served you and me? He took the mantle of serving and he came into the world by taking on flesh. He lived among us, grew up as a carpenter, picked up a trade. As he did that, came to 30 years old, started his ministry. What did he do? Cast out demons. He restored people that were blind. Why would he go and heal people that were paralyzed? He's showing you what the kingdom of God is all about. Restoration, renewal. He's taking broken people and making them whole. And so what you see throughout the New Testament is what Jesus is doing. He's coming to bring liberation. He's speaking of a kingdom that will one day be a part of. He's speaking of this. And what he does is when you work, realizing that Jesus himself came to serve you. And because he came to serve you, you then now have the power to fulfill what God's called you to do in your work. Jesus is an example for us. How did he accomplish that? Last verse, 1 Corinthians 7:21. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of human beings. The reason that you can work your job tomorrow, the reason that you can show Christ at your job, the reason that you can be a difference so the gospel will be made known is to realize this, that Jesus Christ has bought you. He became a servant. He came to this earth, and he had purchased you so that you can now go out into the world, that you can go out into your job, you can go out into institutions. Listen, the institution of Rome was horrible. Slavery in the way that some of the people treated people was evil and wrong. But you're able to go inside of the institutions with a new ethic of how to live, with a new master that calls to you, and someone that you are serving, and you become the example at your workplace. You are doing sacred work. I cannot emphasize that enough. You are doing sacred work. My job and your job is the same. We are both working as priests, beckoning people to come to God. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. I just want to share a little bit about us as a church together. Try to make some of this practical, how we're moving forward. As a church, we talked about this phrase or this idea. We exist as a movement of the gospel of Jesus for all people. The practical way, we looked in Ephesians of how we do that. You become a movement of the gospel in your family, as a parent, as a child, in your marriage, but also in your workplace. You become a movement of the gospel of Jesus, and what's the benefit? People. Just as Christ came to serve you, he came to serve me, he tells us you go out and serve others. The benefit of being a movement of the gospel is it'll benefit your neighborhood, it'll benefit your office, it'll benefit your family and your marriage. We talked about a way that we were going to do that is through gospel-centered community, teaching, service, and multiplication. Kind of want to break down a little bit about that. Teaching. You know, we meet here every Wednesday night. As I think about that, and why do we as a church do we meet in the middle of the week? Like, did somebody just say Wednesday is a good day? It's kind of like you got half the week ahead of you, before you, after you. Why don't we just kind of randomly meet, sing a bunch of songs to Jesus, and talk about the Bible and go home? You know, and I think about is, what is Wednesday? What is it doing? How did it come into existence? What is it for? And here's my encouragement to you. Our Wednesday night services, as we study the Bible and we worship, it's an opportunity for us as a church. You know, the book of Ephesians was written to a group of people that read this book openly. It's us as a church to gather together to do something, to focus our hearts, our minds, to take the frustrations of a fallen workplace, to be able to vent those to God. God, I pray that you'd break the teeth of my boss, break his ribs, and then shove him off the cliff. Right? We can pray some imprecatory psalms together. But what I'm saying is, the middle of the week is an opportunity for us as a church to gather so that we can refocus, we can re-energize, we can get our hearts and minds in the midst of the sacred work of our work week. You can come together. And so I'm imploring you, together as a church, if we want to be a movement of the gospel, it's not about just gathering so you can hear a Bible study. It's you focusing your energy in your heart in the middle of your week to say, God, I'm going to give you a priority place. I got a lot of stuff to do, but I need to be focused on what you've called me to do. And I'm going to sing some songs with some Christian brothers. I'm going to hear your word. I need you to speak to my heart. This is not a guilt trip for you to come on Wednesday nights to make it fuller. What's the benefit of that? This is for you to thrive in your work week. I'd encourage you, come on out on a Wednesday night. One of the things that I've been thinking about Wednesday and the teaching part of it, you know, I realize that in your work week, you guys have a lot of questions. You have a lot of questions about, man, how does this work? And I'm working through this, or I don't understand about this. Or you're wrestling through questions about your own faith. People are coming and telling you things. You're not really sure what the answer is. So starting this Wednesday night for a season, we are taking the last 10 minutes of the service, and you can ask any question you want. Now, it's not with a microphone. Lord knows that's not going to happen right now. So you can text them in. It's a little anonymous, so you might have a little bit of security there. And I will do my best to give you some level of response. It might not be an answer, but I'm definitely going to give a response. And what we're going to do is we want you that are working through questions of faith, questions of living out the Christian life, I want you to be able to talk about it. We're also, what we want to do moving forward is in community. What we're going to be doing as a church, December the 2nd, we are making some changes here at the church. What we're going to be doing December the 2nd is we are going to change our children's ministry. Right now, currently, as a parent, I have 4 kids that are in it. I get a stack of paper, right? Different coloring sheets and glitter and glue and all the rest that goes with it. What we want to do is we want to connect better with you as parents. How are we going to do that? Well, first we're going to do is we're going to take the curriculum, and it's going to be the same lesson that your first grader, second grader, third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader is all going to be the same lesson. At the end of that lesson, you are going to get an email. Well, how are you going to get an email? We're changing our whole check-in system to a digital check-in system. So when you go in the hallway, you're going to check in December the 2nd. You're going to register, your kid's going to get a little sticker. You're going to get a sticker. They send them back to the classroom. And after the service is done, you're going to get an email telling you what your kid learned that day. If we're talking about family and practical ways to do this, we want you to have tools to be able to talk to your kids. I know for me, when I talk to my kids, hey, what'd you learn in Sunday school? Blue. And I'm like, well, that's not really an answer. You need to give me a little bit more depth. And there's nothing on the teachers. It's just, as a parent, it'd be great to have tools to help me in my progress with my kids to talk about the things that they're learning. So we're going to go and do that. What we're going to do is we're going to change our website. Currently, right now, the website, we are developing a new website. And now why are we doing that? Just because we want a fancy new logo? No. We want to help connect better with you. So we're building out this group portal so that you not only can see more effectively our life groups, interactive map, we are giving you tools to better interact with us. In our current website, we really can't do that. So we're going to make a switch. And I told my team, December the 2nd, I know I'm not threatening them, but December the 2nd, it's going to get done. We need to be able to connect as a church. So working on those type of things. And we want to connect in community together with you. But I think it first has to start with us having the tools and the resources to do this so that when we launch out, that there are those things that are in place. And the last area I want to talk about is service. We've been given so much. How do we give back? The last couple weeks ago, Nicole Shanky, who's in charge of all of our serving efforts here at the church, came up to me and says, Ryan, I have this idea for Christmas. I said, okay. And she said, you realize that we're in the community in these schools right now, and what we're doing is we're serving these children week after week by having lunch with them. So there's a group of us that go every week, and they're called Lunch Pals. We picked a school, Campbell Park Elementary School at first. The school is an F school in our county, and she goes, part of the vision of what we had as a church to do was to go into the school and just do something practical, have lunch with one kid, 1 hour, once a week. And she goes, I have this idea. What if we could invite the families of all these Lunch Pals to our church and provide a Christmas meal for them? And then I said, that's a great idea. I'd love to do that. She's like, I don't want to pitch them anything. I just want to let them know that I love them. I said, I'm for that. She goes, I have another idea. What if we could then on top of it buy each of the siblings of those kids that have a Lunch Pal, each of the siblings of their family a gift? Wouldn't that be a great thing for us to do as a church? I said, it would be great. And so starting next week, there'll be like some Christmas trees with these little sticker things or ornament type stuff. And you could just take them. It's got a gift on there. You go buy a gift, you bring it back. And as a church, we're going to invite all these families. Don't know if they go to church, don't know if they're a faith, but we want to live out how to love people. So we're going to invite them out to dinner. And then the gifts that we have, we're going to be able to provide the gifts for them. Then she goes, what another thing would be great to do? I said, okay, hit me. She goes, it'd be great to the Panhandle. We sent a Samaritan's Purse team up there. We've made some connections with the church up there, just in our efforts to reach the people in the Panhandle. She goes, wouldn't it be great if we were able to kind of help them? Wouldn't it be great if we could give some families, just let them know here in the middle of the state that we're just reaching out to them? I said, I think it's a great idea. So service, learning to reach out, to be generous to people in our community. Also, for Christmas, let you know the plan. We're going to have the weekend before Christmas Eve, or Christmas, we're going to have the services here that weekend, and then we're going to do a special Christmas Eve service. We're going to have the 24th, it'll be that night, 6 to 7 o'clock, 1 hour service. There'll be a lot of singing, and then we'll have a short message, and then you guys can go enjoy your family. But here's the deal. We want to let people know in our community know about that. We want you to invite people out to it. We want to demonstrate this aspect of how to serve and connect with other people. We want to advertise it through Facebook. We want to put our signs out there on the road. And all of these things, while they're great ideas, they do cost money to do. They do cost effort and time. They're commitments. And so I think part of the beautiful thing is that we as a church have an opportunity to make a difference in this next couple of months, of us reaching out. And these are just practical things. Part of the teaching I know I'm over time, but part of the teaching that I want to do after the book of Ephesians, we're going to start the Gospel of Luke. And we're going to go and we're going to build up on the story of Christ. We're going to talk about what was going on then. What's this anticipation? What's the big deal of Christ coming into the world? How does this all happen? And it's a story. And so by the time we get to the Christmas Eve service, it's going to be the climax of his birth. So I'm just excited for the next couple of months. If you'd like to help us out in any way, besides your normal giving that you normally do in the offering envelopes, you could just mark the envelope vision. And we're going to take some of those monies to help us in promoting some of these things that we're looking to do, whether with the children's ministry or the website, or whether just advertising our Christmas services. But I just wanted to give you an update about where we're at and to let you know this. Last thing I want to finish with this. I want to pray for you as you go to work this week. You're doing sacred work. You're taking the gospel with you. You're being a movement of the gospel. And when you help people flourish, this is a glimpse of what the new heaven and new earth looks like. This is a glimpse. So we're working for the kingdom. We're working for the kingdom. And this is an opportunity that we have to do this week. So I'd like you guys to stand, and I want to pray for you, that God gives you wisdom, employers and employees together. So Lord Jesus, I thank you for everybody here. I pray that God, that this message of work and what you've called us to do in our work, I know work can be frustrating and difficult. Lord, people in this world are evil. God, that's not a mistake. And Lord, the people are wicked, and I know it's difficult, Lord, in all of us. Lord, you've designed us to work, and I just pray that you would use us as a movement of the gospel. Lord, that we would be changing institutions, how things work and how things run, that they would be better than they were before. God, because we're people committed to your gospel. And Lord, that Lord, not only do we go out to do a job, but we go out as priests. God, we represent your name. God, we represent you. And Lord, help us to be priests in our work. Help us to bring the gospel and the news. Help us to share about forgiveness. Help us to do those things. And Lord, it could be simply as, Lord, for us starting maybe even a Bible study at our group. Lord, it could be also things of how we treat other people. God, it could be the words that we use. God, how we don't tear down but build up. And so, Lord, I want to pray for us as we go out into the work week, as we go out into to our families and into our marriages, that we'd be instruments of change to build up for the kingdom, or that we would do the work that you've called us to do. So, Jesus, thank you for everybody here. I pray that their work week, that they would be met with, as the challenges come in, Lord, that you would be with them, that your spirit would fill them, and you would empower them on what it means to live out the gospel. In your name we do pray. Amen. You guys have a great week. We'll see you Wednesday night.